You're listening to Inside Eyes, and I'm your host, Laura Northrup. Hi, everyone out there listening. Welcome back to another episode of Inside Eyes. I'm your host, Laura Northrup, and this series is about the use of entheogens and psychedelics to heal from sexual trauma. Okay, so I need to start this episode out by explaining a bit about my process in creating it and how I would like to invite you to listen to it. In this episode, I speak with Jonathon about his experiences of childhood sexual abuse and subsequent healing with mushrooms and LSD. Many of the interviews in this series are intense, but this one is about a very severe situation with multiple children and multiple abusers over several years. I debated whether to include certain aspects of Jonathon's story because it is so heartbreaking and potentially painful to listen to. But it is also a story with a lot of hope in it, and I know for other survivors of severe sexual violence that it is meaningful to hear something you can relate to. Because Jonathon's story includes the stories of other children, names have been changed and identifying information and parts of the story that felt inappropriate to share without the consent of the other survivors have been removed. In each of these interviews, I let people speak in their own words how they understand their experience. Sometimes people understand themselves or their experiences in ways that might not make sense to everyone else. And I encourage you to listen with compassion and curiosity, even when you don't always agree with what someone is saying or how they understand their own trauma. So basically, major content warning as you move forward. This episode discusses suicide, death, severe child sexual abuse, and includes some graphic details. And of course, none of the episodes in this series are suitable for children. And the final thing I will say before we get to the interview is that the messiness of editing this episode was such a clear reflection of the messiness of violence in the society we live in. As a larger culture, we crave clear lines between abuser and abused, perpetrator and victim, oppressor and oppressed. But most of us don't have stories that are so cut and dry. We need to hear and tell the stories of our lives and speak truth to the complexity that exists within them. Jonathon's story illustrates something many of us navigate in life: the complexity of what it means to be a person who has caused harm and a person who has been harmed. As human beings, all of us are capable of hurting others. That doesn't mean that we hurt in the same way or to the same degree, but it is a part of what makes us human. We are not gods or angels. We are not devils or demons. We are complex, and to ignore or pretend that that is not a reality surrounding sexual violence separates us from our own humanity. So here we go. So thank you so much for being willing to talk about this stuff and be here today. And I wanted to start by asking you a little bit more about when we had talked on the phone. We talked about that there came kind of a point as an adult when you realized that you kind of needed to look more at the sexual abuse stuff. And I'm just wondering if you can say like a little bit about how old you were when that realization came and kind of what was going on that got you to that place.
Yeah. I must have been probably like 23, and I was doing like a lot of self-harm and cutting at the time. And I was in a pretty abusive relationship, slightly physically and emotionally. And yeah, I just had like a large self-harm moment. I tried to commit suicide, ended up in the hospital, got a lot of stitches, fused a couple tendons together in my hand, and then kind of funnily being a musician, I was like, oh, I could have like messed up my ability to like play music, you know? And I was thinking of root causes of what was happening was like, I did almost die, probably I should deal with this.
Yeah. And when you say root causes, like you knew at the time that something about the sexual abuse was related to the suicide attempt.
Yeah. I just like was kind of slowly realizing that I was having a hard time connecting with fellow humans on like a true emotional level that wasn't like fake. And then all like bad things would happen through substance abuse and blow-ups when I was like trying to engage with like my real thoughts, I guess, instead of putting on like the show that I was like used to.
Yeah. So you're saying like you were kind of living in the show space or just kind of performing connection with people, and then you would use substances and more of your emotions would come out with those people.
Yeah.
And that would be like explosive or bad or in abusive dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you made the suicide attempt, I love how suicide works sometimes where you're like, shit, that's really going to fuck something up. I mean, dying would have fucked up being a musician too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, those are the things, right? Like, where, it's a complicated space to be in. So that was when you started to feel like you really needed to address the sexual abuse more.
Yeah.
Can you give a little bit more context for then, like, what happened when you were a kid?
Yeah. I guess it makes most sense to like set the scene. Classic scene, like somewhat abusive, like alcoholic dad who was not like my abuser at all, but did have bad boundaries about like telling me about sex stuff. He would do a lot of like being blacked out and watching like hardcore pornography, like in the living room when he's watching me.
Which is his own kind of sexual abuse.
Yes, his own kind of sexual abuse. Yeah. And then I remember like lots of me asking about the pornography, being like a small child, like, how come no one's wearing clothes? And then he's like, well, ladies take off their clothes when they want to have sex with you. These kinds of things. Kind of teaching me that women are objects and nude women are like wanting you to have sex with them. And at the same time, my best friend's dad was like an abuser.
This story gets a little complicated. Jonathon explains that his best friend Jacob's father was sexually abusing one of his daughters and possibly all of his kids. Jacob's father sexually abused Jonathon a few times, but Jonathon considers Jacob, who was 2 years older than him, to be his main abuser. The abuse went on for several years, but at some point, adults did become aware that Jacob's father was sexually abusing one of his daughters. After he was outed for the sexual abuse, Jacob's father killed himself. I asked Jonathon if this experience stopped or changed the abuse between the children.
Yeah, it changed it a little. Okay. And so at this point, the abuse had been happening so long that it was like kind of normalized in this way. And then my friend also started like forcing his sister to have sex with him. And then like trying to get me to do that as well. And then I think that has been the biggest source of trauma, is like experiencing sex acts on people and then knowing what that feels like, and then watching my friend do that to his sister and being too scared to like tell on him or like go get an adult. And then I confronted him about it afterwards, like after we did Flash in grade school in 5th grade and learned about like puberty, but then also learned what sexual abuse was.
Mm-hmm. And can you just give a clarification for what Flash is?
Oh, it's like family life
and sexual health?
Sexual health, yeah. Okay. Yeah, family life and sexual health, which actually, for as dumb as like school programs are, was actually in that class. I was like, oh fuck, I was molested. That's like exactly what this is talking about.
After the Flash school program, where Jonathon realized that what he experienced was sexual abuse, he confronted Jacob.
And I said, I think that you sexually abused me, and I think that your dad sexually abused us. And then he was like, well, so did you. Did that? Because also through all this confusing times, and there was also the classic kids, so there was definitely some times where I was abusing and touching as well, or wrapped up in that. And so he was like, you're part of this, like you did it too.
Did that feel like a meaningful healing conversation, or did that feel like you did it too, so don't tell anybody, like you're bad?
Yeah.
It was more like that. Okay.
It was like, don't tell on me, don't tell on either of us, because you're bad also. Yeah. And then that was kind of like the last we talked about it.
When Jonathon was 11 years old, and pretty soon after he had confronted Jacob, there was one night that really marked a change in their relationship. Jonathon describes this night as the most intense and scary time of the ongoing abuse. Jonathon was in the room while Jacob was aggressively assaulting one of his siblings.
After that evening, our relationship was very, different. There was just much more space, like the closeness. The childhood closeness we had, like growing up as best friends, was gone.
Like Jonathon just said, his relationship with Jacob changed forever after that night. But despite the abuse ending, at least for him, he entered 6th grade, and as he puts it,
and then it was just into classic American misogynist culture of women are objects and, these type of things. So in the context of that childhood thing, and then I kind of just blacked it all out, like it didn't happen. I think the first time I ever got drunk, and I was 18, and then it all flooded in.
Wow.
And being drunk and was like, oh, I remember all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
So that was when it was first after blacking it out of my mind by 6th grade, it was as if nothing had ever happened. And I had this idyllic childhood.
Yeah.
And then flash forward to being blacked out drunk at 18, and then just whoa, all this stuff happened.
It's amazing how much we can just not think about sexual abuse.
Yeah. It's I just won't think about it, and it goes away.
Yeah. But then simultaneously how, right now, obviously, you remember so much.
Yeah.
As Jonathon described, at 18, he had a drunken confrontation with his past. And then at 23 is when he made the suicide attempt he talked about earlier and had the realization that he really needed to deal with the sexual abuse. I asked him where psychedelics first came in. Jonathon grew up in a small town in California, and he and his friends would pick psychedelic mushrooms in the woods and eat them, starting in 7th grade. He calls those experiences recreational, but explains that he started realizing the psychedelics were positively affecting him in a healing way when he tried LSD around the age of 17 or 18, which was much stronger than the mushrooms he had been picking in the woods.
It's such a crossfade from when I was just partying to when I was realizing that my mind was being changed in a very positive way. I think maybe the first time I took LSD, I mean, it's probably a lot of people's first experience with psychedelics, where you feel like a veil has been lifted and you understand what reality is, or not reality, but you can feel the energy of the world, or you can feel definitively where your body stops and the world begins, and you can feel yourself, feel your own insignificance as a person, but in a very warm and comforting way, not in I'm insignificant, nothing matters, but I find I can feel myself in context to the rest of the universe. So I'm because I don't really matter, I don't have to put so much weight behind all these things that I feel, I can just be me and love myself in my little dust spot.
Jonathon also explained a bit about why this experience was meaningful in the context of how he felt as a kid.
When I was a kid, I grew up being super scared of death. I was paranoid about death and suffered from depression. So this was kind of the opposite of that. It was all the fears were gone. And then the being allowed, not I was happy and not depressed anymore, but just being, it's okay to feel what I feel and it's not bad. Kind of the end of the happy and sad, which I feel good and bad, happy and sad is a construct of our specific Western culture, and it's not reality.
I asked Jonathon when his psychedelic experiences started to feel like they were consciously coinciding with processing the sexual abuse. And here is what he had to say.
Well, right after the suicide attempt, I took a break from drinking for 2 years just because it was obviously too dangerous and too volatile a substance.
That was connected to the suicide attempt.
Yeah. I was blacked out when it happened.
Okay.
And I think that it probably wouldn't have happened if I wasn't blacked out. Basically, I wanted to still party and get fucked up, but not have it get so dangerous. So I tried a little short time experimenting with sleeping pills, but those just kind of make you have all the symptoms of being blacked out where you can't remember anything, but it's like a little bit more scary for your friends because you're just like falling down in like a weird half narcoleptic state. So that was like pretty short lived. But then I just started taking like lots of mushrooms, just recreationally at first, and then it kind of came out of nowhere where I'd taken them and was like at this party and it was like a little overwhelming. So I wandered off to this junkyard, like old car junkyard. And I was like hanging out and just thinking, I was like thinking of what the people that had molested me as a child were thinking when they were like doing it, and trying to like kind of like have empathy for them, or like figure out originally like why were they thinking that. And then I had this weird, I could imagine myself doing that to somebody.
Sexually abusing somebody, kind of in the same way that sometimes you're like standing next to somebody on like a bridge and you're like, could I just throw them off the bridge and kill them? Like, I wonder if I could just kill somebody. Not like in a way where you're ever going to do it, you know, but you're just like thinking about what it is to be a human and like, what are we actually capable of? Absolutely.
So this is like the mindset I was thinking about this, and thinking in high guy state, like, I think I could do that to somebody.
Well, and it sounds like in some ways you did participate in the sexual abuse of your best friend's sibling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're definitely kind of confronting those things. And I want to add in that I think something that happens for people who are sexually abused as kids is that there's this way that you are being confronted with the extremes of what humans can do at an age where you can't possibly handle understanding that.
Yeah.
Right? Like as adults, it's so hard for us to even accept that sexual abuse happens or that, extreme violence occurs. And I think the questions you were saying, like, where it's like you just have this sort of inner experience of wondering, like, how severe of violence could I commit? I think a lot of times people who have experienced sexual abuse confront philosophical questions like that, because there's that exposure to just the extremes of how far humans can go. Yeah. But so you were having this experience on mushrooms and kind of like looking at the capacity in yourself to cause harm.
Yeah. So I guess then like in coming down from that and processing it like later, which I guess with all of my like healing psychedelic experiences, it's always been about going on this journey and then rehashing it out like after the fact. So through that trip and thinking about it, I was like, I kind of felt some like true forgiveness to both of them for like doing that. And was like not like I understand and it's okay, but just like forgiveness isn't the exact right word, but I can't think of like the word that is good. But what it did for me is it like released me from being part of the blame, or it released me from being like, this didn't happen because I'm like worthless and deserve nothing, which is like the biggest narrative that I fight, is like, I'm a bad person. I don't deserve to be alive because I participated in some of these things. These things happened to me because I'm like unlovable. So I guess like having this forgiveness kind of like released me from some of that. And just whenever I take psychedelics, I like tend to experience just like pure joy, like just the emotion itself, not attached to anything, just with like the laughing or just feeling the body high and feeling like your blood flowing and then feeling alive and that you are worth something. It's like a fast track to that situation instead of the daily not worth anything, which is like the form my depression takes.
Jonathon has used psychedelics to work on a variety of issues, not just sexual abuse. However, it is important to note he is not doing this healing work without support. He has worked with a therapist, and in this next clip, he talks about EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. It is a type of therapy that is commonly used in the treatment of trauma.
I guess recently, in the last year, I did some EMDR treatment about this, which actually has been like wildly helpful in getting rid of some like gut, like physical body reactions that I would have to this kind of thing that affected all of my relationships. Like, I think I've always been kind of like a pretty absent, introverted like partner to people that I've been romantically involved with, because in the back of my head, like, I'm forcing them into all of intimacy, and they like secretly hate me and like loathe me for it. And I'm just like, these classic things that a lot of sexual trauma people deal with. And then instead of talking about it, I'm just like, I'll just say nothing and be really weird and distant. And then they're like, I think that you hate me because you never talk to me. And then I'm like, oh no, it's like all coming true, like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So the EMDR
But the
helped.
EMDR has like changed. Like, I was like definitely a big time freezer and like the fight or freeze. And like, I would say my freezing is almost non-existent anymore, which has been like pretty surprising.
So awesome.
Yeah, I like really didn't think that it was going to be this drastic.
Yeah. That's awesome. For context, do you want to say what you mean by freezing, just for people who might not understand?
Oh yeah, there's basically when I'm triggered by things that trigger my childhood trauma, my reaction is I like literally can't talk, or I like can't say words, and I just want to shrink down and be small. I want to like implode into like a black hole and be gone from this universe. So yeah, that's by freezing mean like I freeze, I can't move, my body's tense. People are like, tell me something. And every time they say that, I'm just like, just like
getting smaller and smaller.
Smaller, tighter and tighter. And then just spinning out, just like running through the lists of like all the worst things that have ever like happened to me and like why they should have happened to me. And then not listening to whatever argument, whatever the trigger was about is usually like not even close. But then I can't then I'm like completely lost. Like, why are we fighting? What's this argument about? Like, where am I? I'm just running through these like lists of my trauma in this like weird way.
Jonathon talked a bit more about how his freezing has played out with his partners. His experience mirrors a classic dynamic in which two people's trauma can really trigger each other during the delicate negotiation of needs and emotions amidst conflict. He feels ashamed and triggered and gets frozen and wants to disappear, and his partner feels abandoned and emotionally neglected. He talks about how the EMDR and therapy have helped him to be more present and respond in conflict.
Or even in that moment to just be able to be like, give me 1 second, I'm like coming up with some sentences. And being able to stay focused on what's being talked about in the moment instead of being completely disassociated to the point where I'm like, I can't really give you an answer because I didn't hear what you said. Even though we're like the only people in the room.
Yeah. Jonathon and I talked about the way that psychedelics are currently being construed in the mainstream, sometimes seen as a cure-all pill. That perspective can fail to illustrate all the other parts of one's life and practice that makes healing possible. And in regards to people who are surviving severe sexual trauma, it takes a lot more than a few psychedelic trips and a few months of therapy to heal. Here is Jonathon reflecting on his larger process.
It's been a 19-year process since I first remembered all this stuff happened. So it definitely takes like a long time. And I like that you said that part about the magic pill or the magic thing, because I think that's like not true for like anything. No one's ever going to find the magic thing. In my personal opinion, I think it's all about having tools, and then you yourself have to do the work. A therapist I just saw, who's the only therapist I've ever seen, recently said this really great thing I've held on to is you belong to the earth, like you're here on purpose, and the earth like belongs to you, like you together. Not in like that part is like hard in our time, especially with whiteness and colonization and all that thing. So I'm not talking about like that
land ownership.
Land ownership, and I'm talking about like entities on this planet, like the planet belongs to them because they're here. And we as entities on the planet, we belong to the planet as like a symbiotic relationship. So it's just like this purposeful grounding. Like, I'm not worthless and need to disappear. I'm like here on purpose. it's hard to believe that sometimes. So that's where these tools come in. So I believe that the most when I'm having like a psychedelic experience, I think because of the way the psilocybin works. And it's my understanding that the chemical is basically the same shape as the chemical that lets you have a lot of neural connections. And I should say I'm not like an expert, so this is some serious like pseudoscience internet guy rambling about like, what the thing about LSD. In my experience, it lets me process more information. So things look all trippy because all the light that's getting to my eyes, my brain is interpreting. And then weird thoughts happen because my brain is pulling from lots of memories. And then my body high is because like all of the cells in my body are like, send more information to the brain. We're feeling grass. We're feeling soft pillows. We're feeling, our arms are spaghetti. And so like these things really make me feel part of the world and make me feel like I'm here on purpose in like this goofy, like rolling around on the ground laughing kind of way. And I think it's just that like letting go and feeling some raw emotion that I take with me and then think in my sober mind and dealing with this, I'm like, no, I can feel these things. These things are real. And then with the EMDR, learning about how it works, I feel like is the only reason it actually worked for me, is like learning what was going to happen in my brain and why I was going to let these things go. But it's like changed specifically just my physical reaction from getting triggered out and freezing. And now it's not like I don't think about the bad things that happened to me, but I'm like, oh, that was that shitty thing that happened in my childhood. It doesn't stop me in my tracks. And so using these things as like kind of like reference points to like tell where I am in reality is like what's helped me heal.
Jonathon goes on to say that part of what has really helped him heal is taking the things that he has learned and making a daily practice out of applying them, even to the small, seemingly mundane moments of life. He has built a practice of self-reflection and awareness. I also asked Jonathon what it has been like to be out to his friends and community as a cis man that is a survivor of sexual abuse.
It's hard to tell what's like in my head and what people are giving me, but I definitely feel like there's a bit of an air of like, well, you should be able to like deal with this. Or it's like not as bad as it could have been.
Do you mean like some minimizing of the impact?
Yeah, minimizing of the impact.
And that feels gender-based to you?
Yeah, that feels gender-based. And it feels, I remember, this was leading up to the like suicide attempt. We were at a party and then this person kind of like groped me and was like forcing themselves on me. And it was a male friend of mine. And was like putting their hands down my pants and like forcing me to make out with them. And I was like pushing them off. And then telling people about that, and everyone was like, you're weak or you're just making this up for like attention.
After talking about the assault that Jonathon experienced around the time of his suicide attempt, we got to talking about what it is like for people who have experienced sexual violence as a kid to go through the process of becoming a sexual adult. I kind of think that that's a really hard time for people who are sexual abuse survivors, is sort of that period of becoming an adult where like there's a lot of being in relationships that are sexual.
Yeah.
And it's so intense if you are a sexual abuse survivor to kind of go through like, I mean, depending on when you start that, I think for a lot of people, it's kind of high school to like mid-20s is so triggering to sort of like suddenly be in this space where no one's talking about sexual abuse and you're supposed to have sex with people and have partners and be in really intimate relationships. And you're like, definitely. I'm triggered out of my mind. Yeah. And there's not a lot of room to talk about it or, understanding.
Yeah. And it can be scary for partners to like know that. And then they're like scared of like, oh, everything I do is like triggering you. So it's like hard to have healthy, intimate relationships, which I think is definitely possible. Definitely feel like I'm closer now to ever.
To having a healthy relationship. Yeah. Jonathon has lost touch with the other kids that were part of his story. He says he has always wanted to talk with them, but it feels unfair to approach them because he doesn't know where they are at in their healing, and he doesn't want to trigger them or force them to start thinking about things. I asked Jonathon if he has spoken to his family members about the abuse and what their responses have been like.
Well, I've never come out to my parents. Talking to my dad about stuff is like always hard. He got sober when I was 10, I think, and is still sober. But him and my mom split up when I was like 3 or something. Whenever anything big happens, he's always like, well, you should have lived with me because your mom obviously didn't do a good job raising you. So that feels, I'm like, I just don't want to go there.
Like if you bring this up to him that he's going to blame your mom.
Yeah, yeah.
As opposed to be like seeing you and helping you.
Yeah, because when I left the hospital after the suicide attempt, I got 89 stitches in my arm, and I told both my parents that happened. And then my mom talked to me a little bit, and then my stepdad, who's like amazing, talked to me, and we had like a pretty good heart-to-heart. And he was like, everyone gets depressed. You should like give me a call next time, and like this is okay. It's like pretty normal, you know? And that was like felt really good. And my dad was like, I don't know what your mom is doing. Like, I can't believe this happened, you know? So that talking to dad about it, it's always seemed kind of weird. I've thought about talking to my mom about this a lot recently. My stepdad just died like a year ago. So I'm like, I'm gonna wait because she's like going through a lot right now.
So in conversations about sexual violence, there is a lot of focus on the abuser and the victim. But something that I'm equally as curious about is how everyone else in the survivor's life responds to the abuse, whether that is a positive, supportive response or a less ideal one, like not paying enough attention to notice it, not being emotionally safe enough to reach out to for help, or just straight up responding negatively. I asked Jonathon if he has found healing with anyone who was a bystander to his abuse, and I thought his response was interesting.
Healing myself as being a bystander and like a victim, I think that kind of compounded the guilt I felt being a bystander. I did like EMDR treatment, and then this last year I hadn't taken LSD for like a long time. I decided I wanted to take like a large dose of LSD, initially just for fun, but then kind of with all of that, I felt kind of like the most joy that I've like ever felt in my life, maybe. Came flooding forward as I was specifically like thinking about like forgiving myself, and specifically thinking about that image of myself and the universe and the context. And that feeling has really like stuck with me. It's almost been a year. It was like on a classic Halloween caper. It was like one of the first times I've ever been having like a super visual, intense psychedelic experience. And I like went in the grocery store, and I was like at like a crowded party talking with people just because I felt so at home in my body for maybe like one of the first times. Or like this last year has been the most growth in like, I'm here. I'm like, it's okay. This was like a very social, like I truly don't care what anyone thinks about me, and I'm like being aware of my like impact on the world around me, and I'm just floating around and laughing and watching the trees sway.
I appreciate that Jonathon talked about his role as a bystander and the lasting guilt that came from that. Not many people talk about being bystanders to sexual violence. And even though I am doing these interviews to talk about survivors healing their own sexual trauma, this story isn't just about that. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, it would be easy if sexual violence was a simple story of the abuser and the abused. But so often, it is much more complex. Many thanks to Jonathon for sharing his story. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, please share about it on social media or with someone who you think could benefit from the wisdom within. If you would like to stay connected, you can find me on Instagram at Laura May Northrup. And finally, special thanks to Joey Seward at Left Field Studios for volunteering a lot of additional audio engineering to make this series possible. If you need an audio engineer, he's excellent. You can find his website in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Inside Eyes. Until next time.